The Battle of Yarmouk is one of the greatest and most famous battles in Muslim history. On one side stood the Roman Empire with its full strength, fielding an army of 200,000 soldiers. On the other side, there were only 30,000 Muslims led by Khalid bin Walid. But wait, Khalid bin Walid had already been removed from his position as army chief before this battle. So how did he end up leading this battle? The story of the Battle of Yarmouk is going to be very interesting. Muslims had already challenged the superpowers of the time, the Roman and Persian empires, during the caliphate of Abu Bakr, may Allah be pleased with him. And when Hazrat Umar became caliph, the Muslims, under the leadership of Khalid bin Walid, had conquered vast territories from both empires. However, as soon as Hazrat Umar became caliph, he removed Khalid bin Walid from his position as army chief, as we have explained in this video. He replaced him with Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah as the new Muslim army chief. During Khalid bin Walid's leadership, the Muslims had already conquered major cities like Damascus, which is still the capital of Syria today. Under the leadership of Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah, the Muslims advanced beyond this city and reached another very important Roman city, now known as Homs, which was called Emesa at the time. Emesa was not an ordinary city. It had long, tall walls, and in front of those walls there was a large canal to prevent any enemy from reaching the city walls. Under Abu Ubaidah's leadership, the Muslims besieged the city from all sides. But the problem was that, when the Muslims reached the city, it was December during the harsh winter, with heavy snowfall. The Muslims had come from the hot deserts of Arabia, so they could not endure the cold. After a long time passed without the Muslims being able to conquer the city, they finally decided to leave as they were exhausted. This was the first time in history that Muslims had retreated from a battle. Seeing this, the general and the people of Emesa were very happy, saying that they knew the Arabs would not be able to bear the cold. So, the general ordered his troops to attack the Muslims to drive them away faster. His army left the fort and started chasing the Muslims. But, as soon as the Roman army was out of the range of their cannons and arrows, the Muslim army suddenly stopped and attacked them. At the same time, two other Muslim contingents joined the attack, and the entire Roman army was annihilated, with their general being killed. Seeing the incredible planning of the Muslim army, it was clear that this must have been Khalid bin Walid's strategy. Abu Ubaidah then brought the Muslim army back to Emesa, and seeing this, the previously joyful Roman citizens lost all their morale and opened the city gates to surrender to Abu Ubaidah. Now finally, the time had come for the Muslims to leave Syria and head towards the Roman Empire's capital, Constantinople, which is modern-day Istanbul, Turkey. However, suddenly, a messenger arrived from Medina, the Muslim capital, carrying a very important letter from Caliph Umar bin Khattab. The messenger delivered the letter directly to Abu Ubaidah. The letter contained something very unusual. It stated that the Muslim army was not permitted to advance any further beyond Emesa, and it clearly ordered that no other territory should be conquered after Emesa. Of course, Abu Ubaidah and the entire Muslim army obeyed Hazrat Umar's orders without question. However, a major issue arose as a result of this order. The speed of the Muslim army, which had already slowed down significantly after Khalid bin Walid's removal, now almost came to a complete halt. Hazrat Abu Bakr had managed to conquer vast areas from Medina to Damascus in just 2 years of his caliphate. But now, in the first 2 years of Hazrat Umar's caliphate, the Muslims had only managed to advance slightly beyond Damascus. So the question arose, why was Hazrat Umar stopping the Muslims from advancing? Hazrat Umar had been personally trained in leadership by the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. The Prophet himself had once been offered kingship by the people of Mecca if he would accept their gods alongside his own. But the Prophet, peace be upon him, refused this easy path and endured years of persecution by the people of Mecca. Similarly, Hazrat Umar knew that while these Muslim conquests would expand the Muslim empire and make him a great king, it would not benefit Islam. Because, as we see today, even though there are almost 2 billion Muslims in the world, they hold little influence. Hazrat Umar wanted the Muslims to remain true to Islam, even if they were few in number. He cared more about Islam than his own rule. So he sent another letter to Abu Ubaidah, instructing him that now he was not only an army chief, but the governor and leader of all of Syria. His responsibility was no longer just fighting wars, but teaching people about the true purpose of Islam. This marked the first time that people outside of Arabia began to learn about the Islamic system. During the caliphate of Hazrat Abu Bakr, may Allah be pleased with him, the Muslims were in such a tense situation that they did not have time to establish an Islamic system in the newly conquered territories. But now, Hazrat Umar introduced the world to a new system, the system of the caliphate. He carefully chose Abu Ubaidah for this task because Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah was one of the first 10 people to accept Islam. After accepting Islam, he was involved in every major decision made by the Prophet, peace be upon him. His loyalty to Islam was so strong that during the Battle of Badr, when Muslims faced the disbelievers, Abu Ubaidah's own father was in the enemy's army, and he was killed by Abu Ubaidah's own hands. Because of this, no one doubted Abu Ubaidah's commitment to Islam. That is why Hazrat Umar removed Khalid bin Walid and made Abu Ubaidah the new leader of the Muslims. Because now, more than battles, they needed a leader who could teach people the true purpose of Islam. So, Hazrat Abu Ubaidah divided Syria into smaller regions and appointed new governors. He himself set up his headquarters in Emesa, the most frontline city, so he would be the first to know if the Muslims faced any danger. He appointed Khalid bin Walid as the governor of the capital Damascus and Amr ibn al-As as the governor of Jordan. In these regions, the Islamic system of zakat and jizya was established, Islamic courts and judiciary systems were set up, and even a police system was created. The powerful people of these areas were removed from their positions and treated like ordinary people, receiving punishment just like anyone else. When the people of the Roman Empire saw all this, they were amazed. They realized that these new rulers were far better than their previous ones. A year passed, and the Muslims did not conquer any more cities after Emesa. Instead, they used this time to strengthen their empire. Meanwhile, the Roman emperor also had time to gather a massive army to fight against the Muslims. Hazrat Umar's caliphate struck so much fear in the hearts of Muslims' enemies that it forced the Roman and Persian empires to unite. Both these empires began raising large armies in their respective territories to fight against the Muslims, leading to major battles such as Yarmouk and Qadisiyah. The Roman emperor held a meeting in Antioch with all his generals, where he asked a simple question: why, despite having greater numbers, do we always lose to these Muslims? All the generals gave the same answer: that the Muslim army's armor is much lighter than ours, which is why their speed is always much faster. Moreover, the Muslims never fight us in one big battle, but instead always attack in small groups. Hearing this, the Roman emperor stood up from his throne and said, "Now, there is only one solution. If you, my generals, want to permanently avoid being enslaved by the Arabs, order the entire Roman army to gather here in Antioch." Along with this, he sent letters to all his provincial governors, instructing them to conscript every young man capable of fighting into the Roman army and send them to Antioch. As a result, a massive Roman army began gathering in Antioch, reaching hundreds of thousands of soldiers. Their plan was to avoid the Muslims' small tactical tricks and fight a massive battle head-on. While all this was happening, the Muslim general, Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah, in Emesa, was receiving intelligence on every move the Roman emperor made. This made the Muslims extremely tense, as they wondered how they could possibly face such a huge army. Sensing the tension, Abu Ubaidah quickly convened another meeting with his generals, asking them what they should do in the face of such a large army. After consulting with each other, the generals decided that they should abandon Emesa without a fight and retreat back to Damascus, where Khalid bin Walid and his army were waiting. Before leaving, however, Abu Ubaidah summoned the city's finance minister and ordered him to return the jizya tax collected from the people. He explained that the jizya tax was collected in exchange for the Muslims' protection, but since they could no longer protect the people, they had no right to keep the tax. Meanwhile, as the Muslims prepared to leave the city, the finance minister and his team went from house to house, returning the tax money to the citizens. Seeing this, the people of Emesa were once again astonished. One man even said to the Muslim general, "May God bring you back to rule over us again." The citizens were already surprised that the Muslims had not killed them or harmed their women, nor had they taken their lands after conquering the city. Now the Muslims were even returning the tax money they had collected. Afterward, the Muslims left Emesa and headed toward Damascus, where Khalid bin Walid was waiting for them with his army. As soon as they reached Damascus, the generals convened another meeting to decide what to do next. In the middle of the meeting, a messenger arrived from Amr ibn al-As in Jordan, carrying a letter. The letter explained that the strength of the Roman army had caused not just Jordan, but also Christians everywhere, to rebel. Seeing that the Muslims had abandoned Emesa due to fear of the Roman army, the confidence of the rebels had grown even further, making it very difficult to control the uprisings. The Muslims found themselves in a dire situation, with the Roman army advancing towards them with 200,000 soldiers on one side, and rebellion breaking out everywhere behind them. The Muslim generals realized that staying in Damascus would be very dangerous. However, Damascus was such a large city that the decision had to be made by the Caliph, Umar ibn al-Khattab, and his ministers in Medina, not just by the generals on the battlefield. In a matter of days, a letter arrived directly from Medina, from Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab, instructing the Muslims to abandon Damascus and all of Syria, and to retreat to a location where they could fight with their backs to the Arab lands, ensuring no rebellions behind them and keeping all their enemies in front of them. Following Hazrat Umar's orders, the Muslims immediately began their retreat from Damascus and moved towards Umar ibn al-As's forces in Jordan. But before leaving, Abu Ubaidah once again ordered the return of the taxes collected from the people, surprising them even more. The people wondered who these Muslims really were. Finally, the Muslim forces, along with Umar ibn al-As's army, gathered near the banks of the Yarmouk River. At the same time, all the remaining Muslim forces in Syria joined them, and together, they awaited the Roman army. Meanwhile, back in Medina, Hazrat Umar and his ministers were extremely worried about how they would face such a large army, as this was the biggest battle in the history of Islam. Reinforcements from Medina. He gave a powerful speech in Masjid al-Nabawi calling on all Muslims to join the battle. Many of the Sahaba, companions of the Prophet who had participated in the first battle of Islam, the Battle of Badr, also came forward, even though they were now quite old. However, this battle was so dangerous that 100 Sahaba who had fought in the Battle of Badr volunteered to fight in the Battle of Yarmouk. Out of the 313 participants of the Battle of Badr, 100 were now ready to fight again, a significant number. Seeing these 100 Badri Sahaba, another 1,000 Sahaba also volunteered for the battle, and after them, another 5,000 Muslims pledged to join the fight at Yarmouk. This sight encouraged Hazrat Umar himself to consider leading the battle in person. However, the other Sahaba advised him not to go, warning that if the Muslims lost the battle and the Caliph was also killed, it would deal a massive blow to Islam. Convinced, Umar decided not to go. Now in the plains of Yarmouk, on one side stood the Roman army with 200,000 soldiers, while the Muslim army had only 30,000. Despite the passing days, neither side made any move to attack. For several weeks, sounds of drinking and partying came from the Roman camps at night, as if they were not preparing for a battle. Seeing this, Khalid bin Walid suspected that something was wrong. One day, a man from the Roman general Vahan's camp came to the Muslim camp and said to Abu Ubaidah, "We do not want to fight you, but rather, we wish to negotiate a deal. Send one of your strongest generals to meet with us tomorrow." Of course, Abu Ubaidah sent Khalid bin Walid. When Khalid arrived, the Roman general tried to intimidate him by lining up his soldiers in a straight line and dressing them in full armor, attempting to instill fear of the Roman Empire in Khalid's heart. But who were they trying to scare? Khalid bin Walid? I don't think so. Ignoring all these displays, Khalid bin Walid walked straight up to the Roman general. The Roman general stood before his soldiers and began his speech. After praising Jesus Christ, he began to praise his emperor, Heraclius, calling him the greatest ruler in the world. He started praising his king, Heraclius, and said that Heraclius, the Roman emperor, is the most powerful king in the world. As he continued to excessively praise Heraclius, Khalid bin Walid interrupted him and said, "Yes, I agree that your king is the greatest king, even greater than our leader. But the person we have made our leader is not actually a king, he is a caliph. And the day even a little desire for kingship arises in his heart, we will remove him from his position." And this was absolutely true. For example, among the Muslim army at Yarmouk were Caliph Umar bin Khattab's own son, Abdullah bin Umar, but he was not there as a general, just as an ordinary soldier. Similarly, the son of the previous caliph, Abu Bakr, Abd al-Rahman bin Abu Bakr, was also part of this battle, fighting as a regular soldier. The army's generals had no relation to Caliph Umar's tribe, Banu Adi, and Khalid bin Walid rejected all of the Romans' offers in that meeting and returned to his camp. But wait, wasn't it strange that despite having an army of 200,000 soldiers, The Romans wanted to make a deal instead of fighting? In reality, it was all a lie. The Romans did not actually want to negotiate with the Muslims, they were just trying to buy time. Remember, we mentioned earlier that shortly before this battle, the Roman and Persian empires had not only become allies, but also family through marriage. Both empires had started raising armies to fight the Muslims together. The Roman Empire was merely waiting for their Persian allies to be ready so they could launch a joint attack and crush the Muslims. This negotiation was just a pretense, and Khalid bin Walid had already realized this. He sent a letter directly to Caliph Umar informing him of everything that was happening. In response, Hazrat Umar sent orders to the Muslim army in Persia, instructing them not to engage in battle with the Persians under any circumstances. Instead, they were to begin negotiations with the Persian Empire, proposing that the Muslims would stop fighting and withdraw from Persian territory. This would slow down the Persian army, and it worked. The Persian king was very happy to hear this and wasted a lot of time in these negotiations, giving the Muslim army time to regroup and avoid a simultaneous battle with both empires. Now, back at Yarmouk, the Roman army was still waiting for their Persian allies. But suddenly they saw that a new Muslim army had joined the existing Muslim forces. This was the additional force of 6,000 soldiers that Hazrat Umar had sent. However, Umar had instructed this army not to enter the battlefield all at once. Instead, small groups of 500 or 1,000 soldiers were to join the main Muslim force each day. This tactic had a significant effect. Every morning, the Roman army would wake up and see that a new group of Muslim soldiers had joined the battle, boosting the Muslims' strength. Finally, after almost a month, Roman General Vahan decided that if this continued, it would be very difficult to defeat the Muslims. So, one day, the Roman army finally left their camps and lined up directly in front of the Muslim army, ready for battle. Seeing this, the Muslims also organized their lines, preparing for the fight. Imagine this battle. On one side stood the Muslim army of 30,000 soldiers, and on the other side was the Roman army with 200,000 soldiers. The difference in size was immense. Some modern historians estimate the Roman army to have been around 100,000, but Islamic sources place their numbers between 240,000 and 500,000. So, let's take 200,000 as an average. Abu Ubaidah organized the Muslim army and placed 4 main generals behind his forces: Amr bin Alas, Shurabil, Khalid, and Yazid bin Abi Sufyan. The night before the battle, Abu Ubaidah gathered all his generals and began planning the battle. As they were making their plans, Abu Ubaidah suddenly asked, "What do you all think if we change the leader just for this battle? What if, instead of me, Khalid bin Walid leads this battle? I will remain the army chief, as we cannot disobey the Caliph's orders. But just for this battle, what do you think?" All the generals immediately responded, "What are you talking about? We've all been thinking the same thing, and now the real battle will begin." They knew that Khalid bin Walid's brilliant strategic mind was desperately needed for this battle. The next day, on the first day of the Battle of Yarmouk, Abu Ubaidah stepped down from his position and joined the ranks of the ordinary generals, while Khalid bin Walid once again took his position as army chief. The battle began. In this battle, all the prominent Sahaba, companions, were present, names that we often hear in Hadith and Islamic history. For example, Abu Dar al-Ghifari, Abu Huraira, Abdullah bin Umar, and Abu Ayyub al-Ansari. Even Ammar bin Yasir, who was 70 years old at the time and whose parents were among the first martyrs of Islam, was present in this battle. The sons of Hazrat Abu Bakr, Hazrat Umar, and Hazrat Uthman, may Allah be pleased with them all, were also part of this battle. The first day of the battle was August 15th, 636. By this time, it had been 2 years since the start of Hazrat Umar's caliphate. The Roman army, using their superior numbers, launched the first attack on the Muslims, and the fighting continued for a long time. However, both armies were testing each other's strength and resilience on this day, so neither side suffered significant losses. As evening came, both armies returned to their positions. During this battle, a Roman soldier named George was martyred. He is referred to as a martyr because, before the battle, he had left the Roman army, accepted Islam, and joined the Muslims. On the very first day of his new faith, he was martyred. On the second day, the Roman Empire tried to surprise the Muslims by launching an attack right after Fajr, the early morning prayer. But Khalid bin Walid had anticipated this move, and the Muslims were fully prepared for the battle. This time, the Romans launched a fierce attack, and after some fighting, the Muslim right flank, led by Amr bin al-As, began to feel immense pressure. Slowly, they started retreating until they reached the Muslim camps, where the women and families of the Muslim soldiers were present. Since the Muslims had been living within Roman territory for the past few years, their families had also settled there, having left Arabia. When the women saw that the Muslim army was slowly retreating, they lined up camels in front of their camps, creating almost a wall. Then, they drew their swords and charged into battle against the Roman Empire's army, something that had never happened before. Some women even started throwing stones at the Muslim men from their camps, while others began reciting verses to shame the men for retreating, urging them to go back into battle. And it worked! The Muslim army stopped retreating and firmly held their ground. At the same time, Khalid bin Walid with his forces arrived to support the right flank of the Muslim army. Together, Amr ibn al-As and Khalid, may Allah be pleased with them both, pushed the Roman army back and forced them to retreat to their original position where the battle had started. The battle resumed from where it had initially started. When the battle normalized again, suddenly, the Muslim left flank, led by Yazid bin Abu Sufyan, could not hold any longer and slowly retreated all the way back to their camps. Once again, Muslim women picked up swords and joined the battle against the Roman Empire. Other women started throwing stones at the Muslims and reciting poetry to boost their morale. It is said that one of the women was Hind, who threw a stone at Abu Sufyan and said, "Now go and cleanse the sins you committed before accepting Islam." After this, the Muslim army stabilized once again. Seeing this, Khalid bin Walid rushed from the right side at full speed with his troops to assist the left side, and once again, they pushed back the Romans to the point where the battle had started. A short time later, as evening approached, the Roman army, having gained nothing, retreated to their camps. On the third day of the Battle of Yarmouk, the Roman Empire launched another attack on the Muslims. Again, after a brief skirmish, the Muslim right flank began to retreat. However, this time they were ordered not to retreat in a straight line like before, but at a specific angle so that the Roman army would split in two. Khalid bin Walid could then attack them from the center. The Muslim army followed this strategy exactly, and both the Muslims and the Romans fought fiercely throughout the day, with many casualties on both sides. As evening came, the Roman army once again retreated to their camps. The fourth day of the Battle of Yarmouk was the most dangerous day, and it is still remembered today as the Day of Lost Eyes. On this day, Roman General Vahan completely changed his strategy. In the morning, he ordered only his left flank to attack the Muslims while he slowly advanced with the rest of his army. This was a brilliant plan, because after a short time, the Muslim right flank once again began to retreat. Seeing the situation, Khalid bin Walid ordered Abu Ubaidah and Yazid to attack the Roman army rather than just standing their ground, and he himself rushed to support the Muslim right flank. Abu Ubaidah and his forces went forward and held off the Roman army for a long time. But eventually, the Roman general brought forward his archers, who began raining arrows on Abu Ubaidah's forces. Many Muslims were martyred, and among those who survived, 700 were struck in the eyes by arrows, leaving them almost blind. Forced to retreat, Abu Ubaidah's army slowly fell back. For the first time in the battle, both the Muslim right and left flanks had retreated so far that they reached their camps. Once again, Muslim women emerged from their tents, picked up swords, and fought against the Roman army. The other women began throwing stones at the Muslims to awaken their Arab pride. Later, a Muslim soldier said that on the day of Yarmouk, they feared the words and stones of the women more than they feared the Roman army. Despite being much smaller in number, the Muslim army stood firm, and the Roman soldiers were astonished that even with such overwhelming numbers, they could not push the Muslims back. Evening came once again, and despite having an army of 200,000 soldiers, the Roman Empire had not made any significant gains and was forced to retreat. The Roman general and his army had initially thought that this would be a battle lasting just 1 or 2 days. However, seeing the courage and determination of the Muslims, the morale of the Roman army was completely shattered. The Muslims also suffered the most casualties on this fourth day, and when they went to collect their martyrs from the battlefield, they found that among them was Ikrimah bin Abu Jahl. Ikrimah had fought bravely and had taken an oath during the battle to embrace martyrdom. How strange it was. This Ikrimah was the son of Abu Jahl, one of Islam's greatest enemies, yet here he was, sacrificing his life for Islam. After the fourth day, Roman General Vahan called a meeting with all his generals and asked, "What's going on? "Why are we not winning?" The generals replied, "The Muslims will not retreat, and our army is too exhausted and no longer capable of fighting." Based on this advice, Vahan made a decision. On the 5th day, as soon as the battle started, the Muslims were fully prepared for the fight. But that day, the Roman army did not attack. Instead, they sent a messenger to Khalid bin Walid with a message saying that the Roman army no longer wanted to continue the battle and that they should stop the fighting for now and resume on another day. The Muslims remained in their battle formations, but no fighting took place on the 5th day. Khalid bin Walid called a meeting with his generals and informed them of the Roman offer. Some of the generals said that not only were the Romans exhausted, but the Muslims were also quite tired, so they should accept the offer. However, both Abu Ubaidah and Khalid bin Walid believed that the battle had only just begun. Khalid stood up and said, "Up until now, our strategy has been to tire them out without attacking. When they are exhausted from fighting, then our real game will begin." Khalid bin Walid rejected the Roman general's offer and ordered the entire Muslim army to be ready for an attack. On the 6th day, instead of the Roman army, a young Roman warrior named Gregory, a very powerful soldier, came forward and challenged the Muslim general to single combat. For the first time, Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah stepped forward to accept the challenge. But Khalid bin Walid stopped him, saying, "You are about 50 years old, how will you fight this young man?" Abu Ubaidah replied, "If I don't go, people will say that the Muslim general was afraid of a young boy. And if I am martyred in this fight, I nominate you, Khalid, to be the army chief after me." With that, Abu Ubaidah advanced, and the duel began. After a long fight, Gregory pretended to retreat towards his army. But this was just a trick. As soon as Abu Ubaidah followed him, Gregory quickly turned and swung his sword at full speed. At the last second, Abu Ubaidah dodged the attack and struck Gregory's neck with his sword, decapitating him. Seeing this, Khalid bin Walid shouted, "Allahu Akbar!" and the entire Muslim army joined in shouting the takbir. After 6 days, for the first time, Khalid bin Walid ordered the Muslim army to launch an attack on the Roman Empire. Abu Ubaidah remained where he was, and the Muslim army joined him, charging at the Roman forces. The Muslims, full of excitement and zeal, clashed with the Roman army at full speed. However, despite their enthusiasm, the Roman army was so large that the Muslims could not inflict much damage, and the battle continued for a long time. Many Muslims were martyred, and it slowly began to seem as though Khalid bin Walid had made a big mistake by launching this attack, as retreating from this position now seemed impossible. Roman General Vahan was very pleased with Khalid bin Walid's miscalculation and smiled as he looked towards the Muslims. But suddenly, he saw Khalid bin Walid, riding alone on his horse, rushing at full speed towards the right side of the Muslim army. He thought, "What harm can one man possibly do?" No one knew where Khalid bin Walid was going. As Khalid rode past the Muslims and approached the mountain, suddenly, out of nowhere, 8,000 horsemen appeared from behind the mountain and joined Khalid at full speed. These 8,000 horsemen launched an attack on the Roman army from the right flank. No one knew that the night before, Khalid bin Walid had secretly sent these 8,000 horsemen behind the mountain and had given them orders. "When you see me riding at full speed, that is your signal to attack." These 8,000 horsemen began crushing the Roman army with great speed. Seeing this, fear spread throughout the Roman army, and they started retreating in all directions. The Muslims pursued them as they fled. The Roman army tried to escape across a bridge that served as their main retreat route. However, when they reached the bridge, they found that another division of the Muslim army was already stationed there, having been secretly positioned by Khalid bin Walid the night before. Khalid bin Walid's calculations were so precise that he knew he would win the battle. But he also planned to ensure that when the Romans retreated, he would not let them escape. It is said that when Khalid bin Walid witnessed this scene, he closed his eyes for a moment and thanked Allah for this great victory. Then, opening his eyes, the first thing he asked was, "Where is Vahan?" He was told that Vahan had escaped, so Khalid bin Walid pursued him at full speed and caught up with him shortly thereafter, killing him. This Battle of Yarmouk is known as the Battle of the Century because it changed the course of history forever. Before this battle, the people of Syria and the surrounding region spoke Greek and Aramaic. But after this battle, to this day, the people of this region speak Arabic. Syria, which was once the center of Christianity, is now completely Muslim. Just imagine how happy the Muslims in Medina must have been when they heard of this victory. At the same time, when news of this defeat reached the Roman Emperor Heraclius, he stood in Antioch and looked towards Syria one last time, saying, O land of Syria, I bid you farewell. You are one of the most beautiful lands in the world, but alas, after today, we will never return here again." With that, Heraclius left Syria forever, and returned to his capital, Istanbul. After this battle, the Muslims had free reign to go wherever they wanted in Syria. But instead of heading towards the Roman capital, Turkey, the Muslims turned their attention towards another city just days after this battle. The city of prophets, Jerusalem, which the Muslims had long awaited to conquer. And so, a few days after the Battle of Yarmouk, the Muslim army left Yarmouk and headed straight for Jerusalem, surrounding the city. However, the Muslims' issues of governance were not resolved with just the Battle of Yarmouk.